All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of On the Margin. I'm joined by the indubitable Mr. Mark Yusko. Mark, welcome to the show, my friend.
Indubitable. We'll see how nimble I am as I have to do the climb, right, for the sock reveal. So I have the original, Bitcoin logo from Satoshi himself, and then he modified it from the BC to the B, and then BitBoy came along and gave us the one we have today. So a little history lesson on the logo.
Mark, has your wife ever watched this show? I am getting nervous for you. For those who are not following along on video, Mark just stood on one foot on a chair that's rotating. So he's got one foot, he's rotating in midair. I applaud you, my friend. I applaud you.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you said, because this morning I was thinking, because I am in the office today instead of at home, since we're doing this on Thursday instead of Friday. And it's funny you say that, because I was thinking, it is kind of a wobbly chair. And what would happen, like, if we were like live and I fell and like hit my head, and he'd be like, Mark, call Pam, it'd be 911. But I survived, so it's good. We're all good.
Excellent. All right. Well, maybe you've got a second or third career in you as a gymnast. We shall see.
Yeah,
but
or circus performer. Maybe.
I think so too. All right. Let's. We got a lot of ground to cover today. I want to get your thoughts on the FOMC that we just had. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Yeah. I mean, just the Fed. First of all, a shout out. Congratulations to my colleague, Jack Farley, who does not need to eat grass live on his podcast, because he said that he would eat grass, quote unquote, if we didn't get 75 basis point hike. We got the 75 basis point hike. Congratulations, Jack. Although, honestly, I think grass would be pretty healthy. So maybe you'll still decide to do it for fun. Yeah. Why not? But now we've got a Fed funds that's sitting at
cows love it, right?
They do. They seem happy, So who knows? Maybe they know something we don't. But we got Fed funds at 3.25%. And on the right here, you're seeing just a whole bunch of different, FOMC economic predictions, right? Going 2022, 2023, 2024. This is GDP, unemployment rate, PCE inflation. And then we've got core PCE inflation, which we know that the Fed likes to take a look at. Basically, what they're predicting here, to sum everything up, is as they're raising rates, obviously, and they're predicting lower GDP, so slowing growth, and they're predicting higher unemployment and higher inflation compared to what it was in June. Not a super pretty picture. I'll just pause there. Do you have any takeaways from the FOMC or what Powell said?
Look, it's confounding. There's no other word for it, in the sense of, like, what's the mission? Okay, so the stated mission of the FOMC is price stability and full employment, right? So, okay, kind of failed on the price stability part pretty clearly. The full employment, we'll give them credit for it. Although, as we've talked about, a lot of it is BLS, as I say. It's the birth death stuff. But that said, it's fine. I don't think that is their mandate, right? I think their mandate is to enrich the bankers and keep the banks profitable. And I think what we're seeing is they actually can raise the mission accomplished banner on that. Now, it took them 13 years, but post global financial crisis, right after the global financial crisis, the banks were done. I mean, they were bankrupt, completely and totally bankrupt. And some countries, like Iceland, said, yeah, we're going to shut them down. But not here, right? Because too many bankers' friends were in powerful positions at Treasury and others, and they handed them, Hank Paulson handed out billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. So no one had to go bankrupt. And then they cut rates to zero. And we've talked about this over and over. The banks are the ones that borrow at zero. I don't know anybody who has a zero interest rate loan. I mean, I really don't. I don't know anybody. In fact, I think you showed me the chart a few weeks ago of I can't remember, but this crazy chart of the average car loan interest rate is double digits. Most people say, zero interest. Yeah, that's for the handful of people who have good credit. The average person doesn't really have good credit, and they're paying as high as 29%. It's capped, I get at the usurious rate of 29%. So, and now car loans go 8 years, and it's just like a rental payment. So that's a long-winded way of saying I am struggling, because if the goal was to kind of reinflate bank balance sheets, they did that. Now they want to put interest rates back to a level where they feel like um, they're neutral, right? That's the whole thing, is they want to be at a neutral policy. But here's the thing: interest rates have historically been roughly equivalent to nominal GDP growth, and nominal GDP growth has fallen off a cliff. So we're way out of whack on that measure. And the more they crank on the lever, the worse that, in the right-hand chart, the number on the left is going to get. And this idea that somehow we're going to have some magic recovery in Q3 or Q4 or into next year is ludicrous. I don't know if you've seen the chart, I'll send it to you later, of earnings forecast finally starting to go
Come
down.
down. Yeah.
And, it's, look, hope springs eternal. Earnings, I love it. Wall Street analysts, only job, I think, maybe in the world where you can, on average, be right 4 times out of 10 and make $1 million a year. I mean, look, I flip a coin and be right 5 times out of 10. But that's just crazy. And so they're finally having to say, like my wrestling coach, where the head goes, the body follows. And if GDP is going down, earnings are going down. And I think it's pretty ugly. I saw the yen intervention this morning. That's big news. And I think that's the central bankers jousting with each other. Jay Powell's like, all right, I'm going to crank up rates. And so the yen is going to scream downwards. And the Bank of Japan's like, whoa, wait a second. So they had to intervene, but they're going to run out of reserves. And I think 150 is a shoe-in for the yen dollar. And I remember, this is back a few years, but I remember we had John Malden at a conference in New York. So that's probably 5 or 6 years ago. And Abe-san was in. He was talking about weakening the yen, and John was like, "Oh, we're definitely going to 175, and eventually we're going to 250." And everybody's like, "Okay, John, you have totally lost it." Directionally, he was exactly right. Maybe it's taken a little longer, but 141 this morning. I mean, that's a huge move from the beginning of the year. Huge.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't look like, right, the market is there. A couple months ago, there were some very smart people that I thought were debating something that was interesting, which is the bond market pricing things in, and is the Fed basically reacting and trying to make the market seem like trying to make it seem like they are in control, but really they're just following the market, or are they moving the market? And I think just watching how things have played out, I think that the Fed has an enormous amount of control, and they are effectively moving this. The dollar, I mean, and it doesn't look like they're going to stop, right? I think the market's expectations are finally kind of more moving towards what the dot plot says and what the Fed says. And the market is believing the Fed that they are going to hike pretty aggressively towards the end of the year. I mean, this chart on the right, this tells you that the market is now pricing in another 115 basis points in, by the end of the year, which would bring Fed funds up to 440, right? And you can see, and like we keep showing this chart, I feel like week over week over week, and there's a blue line, right? Versus a purple line. So I guess it's slightly going down, but I mean, we're still basically pricing in, a federal funds rate of just under 450, right? In the beginning of next year.
Again, if you said that out loud a decade ago, people would have laughed at you, saying, "There's no way it could get that low." Right? I mean, look at the left-hand side of the chart, right? We're talking 7, 6, right? 4.5 is not high. And this is part of the struggle with all of this is we were at 0 for so long, right? We were at this emergency level of financial accommodation for so long. The people actually started to believe it. Like I saw somebody this morning saying, the cloud companies average multiple of sales is down to 5.5. It hadn't been that low since 2011. I'm like, are you joking? 5 times sales, right?
Yeah.
Companies don't sell in normal circumstances at 5, 8, 10 times sales, right? They just don't. They
Mhm.
sell at 1.5 or 2 times sales. And we've deluded ourselves through money illusion that this is normal, that
Mm.
these low rates are normal. And so now the world is freaking out as we go from emergency level to normalized levels. And 4.5 is low relative to history. I
Yeah.
mean, and here's the, I talk about this a lot, right? Which is low interest rates are a sign of economic weakness, right? High interest rates are a sign of economic strength. Now, to your point, is the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail?
Mhm.
You can't just declare strength. I mean, the White House has been doing it for months. This is the strongest economy in history.
Yeah.
Like, are you joking? I
Mm.
mean, we're the manufacturing hub of the world, not China. Like, can you show me any data? Like anything. Show me
Mhm.
one piece of data that would support that statement. There isn't any. And so by saying, oh, rates are high, so life is good, we don't have a recession. And there was another great one this morning. 1 year ago, I wish I could find it, but I can't. I'm not going to find it. 1 year ago, the Fed said 0 chance of recession. Inflation is transitory. There won't be any inflation.
Saw
We don't
this.
see any chance of raising rates anytime soon.
Yeah.
Anytime soon was the air quotes. That was 1 year ago.
Mm.
Now he's, and he really is like, Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, Jay the Dove is gone, right? It's like Two-Face. I mean, I'm Jay the Dove. No, I'm Jerome the Hawk. And he is totally hawk on. And that investing.com cartoon I said about, the Hawks, they are descending. And he's playing Alfred Hitchcock. And he's like, I don't care if the lady gets her eyes pecked out by the birds. I really don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to take, I mean, one of the mistakes maybe that people made, if you rewind the clock back to whenever the Fed finally did pivot away from their stance on transitory and say we actually do see, we were
Yeah.
wrong about transitory. That was what, November or December of last year. It has been
November.
a
Right. That was
Yeah,
the peak. Yeah.
it has been a steady march down to, and the irony was that people didn't really believe the Fed at that point. But basically, as soon as the Fed said that, they declared their intent. What you should have taken that as a sign that one, they're going to try to withdraw liquidity from the market. Two, they're going to hike rates. They basically did signal that they were going to do that. I mean, if my takeaway from listening to Jerome Powell talk yesterday was, I mean, he came right out of the gate, right? I tweeted it. He said price stability probably 5 times in the first 30 seconds, right, of the FOMC. Very, very declarative language. And he did finger the tight labor market as something that he wants to fix as a perpetrator of high wages and inflation. So, it,
Which is so disingenuous and so wrong, right?
mm,
The labor component of inflation, it's tiny relative to what we've talked about: oil prices, used cars, etc.
yeah. Can you walk me through? I actually have I was having this debate with some people from Blockworks earlier today. I actually okay, if you take the idea that one person's costs are another person's income,
Right.
then
Yes.
how can how can costs outprice people's wage growth? Do you follow me? Like if
Mhm.
prices are going up, if costs for one group of people are going up, doesn't that
Mhm.
necessarily get balanced out by an increase in income for another group of people? So when people talk about people's real purchasing power getting eroded, isn't it more just a rebalancing or a reshifting of purchasing power amongst group of people? Like,
Again, this is the question, right? It depends on
mm,
whether companies have pricing power, right?
mm,
If you have no pricing power because there's no excess demand and costs rise, your profits go down and incomes actually go down, not up.
mm,
right? And
Mm,
so, and this is my big thing about why we're not in the 70s. There is no excess demand for anything,
mm,
right? There are not, you know, we're not taking more airplane flights. We're not taking more cruises. We're not buying more stuff. Now, part of it is because you can't get the stuff. Like I would actually like to upgrade my car. I mean, same car. I want to get the same car, but I want to get a new version of my 5-year-old car. Can't get one. Literally, there are no Kia Niros to be had in the United States. There are 3, and I'm not going to fly to Hawaii and pick it up and put it on a ship and bring it back here. And so it is. I believe I 100% agree with your point, and I talk about this with student loans. Right, you're forgiving somebody's debt, but that's someone else's asset. That's a bad thing. And then the government says, "Oh, but we got that debt. We already bought the debt back, and we're the sponsor, so it's just us." Well, right, but then you got to tax someone to get that money. Well, no, we don't. We can just
mm,
print it because we're Keltonite. We're in the cult of Kelton. So, but all of this to me just leads to what we have, right? We have a devaluation of currency. And that devaluation of currency is why everybody is feeling poorer. And so you're not
mm.
seeing that concomitant rise in incomes because you go to the grocery store and $20 doesn't buy you anything. And
No.
I measure it, and although I don't use cash anymore, but I used to measure it by ATM. When I was growing up, first ATMs came out, $20 and get you through a week, easy. Then it went to $50. Last time I went to the ATM, I took out $300 and it was gone like that. So I just think we remember prices being normal when we're young, even though they're just relative to your point, they're just relative to incomes. 1971, this great chart that I just tweeted out the other day. 1971, average house cost 25 grand, average car was 3,500, rent was $150 a month, a dozen eggs was 45 cents, gallon of milk was $1. But the average income was $10,250. But here's the
Mm,
rub. Today, average income's up to 54,000. Okay, big move. But the average house price is closer to 350. So you've had a bigger
it's north of
increase in
4.
the
North of
stuff.
4. It's like
North of four,
420.
north of four. Okay, all right, 420.
Yeah.
So it's even worse. And so wages, particularly for the bottom half, wages, the top 10%, awesome. I mean, off the charts higher. Wages at the bottom, actually, the average, the middle, in real terms, is unchanged since the late 70s. That's
Mm,
a frightening stat. That is a frightening stat. And for the bottom
yeah.
part, wages are actually down in real terms.
Like one of the ways that I've heard this described best, right, is the way Lynn Alden describes inflation, which is inflation benefits creditors, not debtors, right? Because one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
like debt is denominated obviously in nominal terms, right? So when
Mhm.
prices and wages kind of go up, then your debt relative to your income is very beneficial. So I mean, it feels even weird saying this because I mean the narrative around inflation is very much, and I still just haven't been able to figure this out for myself, and I feel like I see a lot of conflicting data on
It's
this,
part
which
of the
is basically,
plan, Michael.
mm,
It is the plan, right?
mm,
Who are the largest debtors in the world? I mean, who are the greatest people in
well, I
debt? The Western
suppose it's the
countries.
U.S. government. Yeah, right.
US government,
Yeah,
right? The countries
yeah,
themselves. So what do
yeah,
you have to do? You have to
yeah.
generate inflation. And the problem is at some point it stops working. And that's what Japan's
Mm,
faced with right now, right? They've been trying to generate inflation for decades.
mm,
I mean, think about this, right? They had super high inflation, right? Remember Japanese real estate prices, the land under the palace was worth more than San Francisco or New York or whatever it was. And then it all crashed. And it
how it
crashed.
does.
And
Yeah.
then demographically, it got ugly. And what do? They start to print. In fact, if you look at our M2 growth, we look like amateurs compared to the Japanese. I mean, Japanese M2
Yeah.
growth, I mean, it's literally a parabolic curve. And
Mm.
and yet, no inflation, no high interest rates. Now, the quality of life is still pretty good, right? You go to downtown Tokyo and the restaurants are nice and the hotels are nice. I mean, kind of weird, kind of funky 1950s feel to me, and too many people smoking, but it isn't like a depression. But they've been in no way, shape, or form able to generate any inflation. So what do? They just buy their own debt. So they are buying up all the debt. Now we're trying, because we can't buy all our debt because there's just too much of it. And since the Chinese are selling it and the Russians are selling it, China's been net sellers of our debt since, I think, 2014, something like that. We have this problem that we have to try to inflate it away. So this whole thing about price stability, it's Shakespeare. The lady doth protest too much, methinks. If you have to tell me over and over and over again that you're worried about inflation, you're not worried about inflation. You like inflation.
There's a Rudy Havenstein. He's a great Twitter account. He's been tweeting, these quotes from Yellen. Low inflation, one of the great problems of our time. It's like, oh man, did that ever not age well? To your point about the Japanese
we'll
problem as well.
never have a financial crisis in my lifetime. I mean, Janet Yellen
Subprime is contained.
Yeah, subprime. She might be the greatest contrarian indicator. I mean, other than magazine covers, or like the headline. I guess there was a headline today in the Wall Street Journal that gold has lost its safe haven status. Now, why would you print that, Michael? Why would the editors of the Wall Street Journal print that headline across the top of the Wall Street Journal?
Well, I mean, it's certainly in the U.S. government's interest for that to be the case. So
why? Okay, pull that thread. Beautiful.
Well,
Genius.
I mean, well, the reason why is because they want the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is the reserve currency of the world, and that's the way I think our political system is basically we are actively trying to ruin the network effects of our own currency. So, portraying this idea that gold isn't actually safe, well, theoretically, I guess if people believe that, it'll push more people towards buying treasuries.
Oh my God. There are 5 people in the world who would answer that question, and you are one of them. That is amazing, Michael. That is truly
Appreciate it.
Dazzling. No, seriously. I could ask that question to 100 people, and not 5 of them would get it right. And that is exactly why they're doing it. It's exactly why JP Morgan spoofs the price of gold every single day. And they will get fined another $1 billion this year. And they will say, so what? We make $20 billion spoofing the price of gold. And it furthers our national interest, because we are trying to discourage people from owning gold and get them instead to buy treasuries, because the largest buyers of treasuries historically have told us to F off. That is so misunderstood, and so you are a genius. I love doing this with you. And we did not rehearse this. We did not rehearse this. That was a live question that you had no idea it was coming. And you did the analysis that I said 95 people out of 100 would no way do that analysis. No way.
You know what else? I heard this line from Joseph Wang. He was the Fed guy on Twitter, former trader at the Fed. And if you look at banking regulation that got enacted post great financial crisis, Basel, Basel II, Basel III, whatever they're on right now. Basically, it's an attempt, ostensibly, right, to limit the amount of risks that banks can take after the little foo-foo back in 2008. And one way you could read that is, oh, that's a good. Well, what are the safest assets that you want to buy? Treasuries, of course. Another way that you could read that exact same thing is, if you were a government and your aim was to get people to essentially continue to buy your currency in, ad infinitum, you bake it right there into the regulations. Well, obviously, this is the safest stuff that you should want to buy and own. let's put it in the regulation. It's just an interesting alternative way that you could
No,
potentially
it's
read that.
so beautiful because it's punctuated by um, Jamie Dimon at the hearings the other day. So
Yeah.
first, you got this crazy woman. I mean, the idiocy. I mean, complete idiocy of saying that banks should not fund or finance fossil fuels, and that and she actually said out loud, we need to have zero new production of fossil fuels. And I just want to say, those glasses you're wearing, those produced with fossil fuels, did you get to work today in something that was produced with fossil fuels? How about that chair you're sitting in, or the electricity used to power that microphone that you're blathering into like an idiot? And Jamie was awesome. He said, he said, um, no, that would be a road to hell. Like, of course we're going to finance fossil fuels. But then he went on, because I asked him another question about crypto, and he said, well, you know, blockchain, yeah, definitely. I should have my blockchain, not Bitcoin socks on, or Bitcoin, not blockchain socks on. Um, Blockchain, definitely. But these things that you call currencies, these tokens, just a Ponzi scheme. And but we
Decentralized Ponzi scheme.
decentralized Ponzi scheme. But
Can
we
you even have a
have
decentralized Ponzi
J.P.
scheme?
Morgan
Is
coin.
it
No, you can't. You can't.
isn't that an
But
oxymoron?
it's an
I mean,
oxymoron,
what?
right? I mean, but again, it's an intentional oxymoron because he has authorized within his own organization a very large group that not only trades this decentralized Ponzi scheme that he hates so much, but also is now recommending to their clients. Like literally in JP Morgan Wealth Management, it is a recommendation that you should own some, and they have a price target with 6 digits. So it's all theater. But what I loved about it was he said, well, but we have JP Morgan coin,
Hmm.
and so you should use that. And I think we've talked about Mr. Robot before, which if you haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. I said I'd be a lot
Pretty ahead of
wealthier
its
had I
time.
watched it in real time. I mean, it's gross. I mean, it's horrific and it's hard to watch sometimes, the violence and the drugs, but the writing is phenomenal. The story is phenomenal, and the links to Evil Corp, which is JP Morgan. I mean, clearly, and Evil Coin, which is JP Morgan coin, and Bitcoin, which is actually in there, is staggering. And it was written in real time in 2016 when all this stuff was happening, and it's just brilliant, brilliant
Mm.
writing.
Yeah, I want to get to because I want to get your take on the stablecoin legislation, the proposed stablecoin legislation that has just become public this past week, because I think that direct ties to kind of what we're talking about. Before we do though,
Yeah.
I want to get your take on the rising dollar, because one, who's looking pretty smart right about now is Brent Johnson and his dollar milkshake theory. But whatever it
Mhm.
is, right? Whatever the reason why, right? The dollar it's been a precipitous rise up. So right, we're recording this on the 22nd. That's Thursday. The dollar is sitting above 111, and more importantly than just the level of where it's sitting, which is multi-decade highs, right? But we're talking about almost historic highs, right? Back in 2000 or around that was the last, I think, the all-time high, or maybe it was in the late 90s. Was the around over 120, but we're getting right up there. But it's the pace, it's the rate of change, right? It's been a very rapid rise. So
Yeah.
for me, I'm kind of watching that and thinking that's got to be enormous pressure on our allies, right? That's got to be enormous pressure on Japan and on Europe. And typically when the dollar does something like this, that's when we get a sort of controlled devaluing of the dollar, right? You get your Plaza Accord type agreement. So I'd be
Mhm.
curious. I mean, how much should people be watching the rise of the dollar? And could that actually be the pressure point that makes the Fed take its foot off the gas a little bit and start talking a little less tough?
Well, again, so yes, yeah, and we've
Mm,
talked about this over and over. Is I still will argue that it's not dollar strength; it's other currency weakness, right? It's
hmm
it's the yen being absolutely destroyed and the euro being eviscerated.
Mm.
And, here's the interesting thing, right? The only way you survive if you're an exporting country is you have a weak currency. So the yen, I mean, I'm sorry, the euro, perfect sense, right? They want the euro to be as low as possible. They'll jawbone about how they want it higher. Baloney. The lower the euro, the more machine tools and cars Germany can sell. The yen, on the other hand, is problematic, right? Because they're an importing country. They have to import stuff. And so you actually want a stronger currency. And I think one of the challenges for the United States is this change in the nature of import versus export because of oil, right? When we were a big importer of oil, strong dollar was great because we were putting dollars out into the ecosystem, and that was fantastic. Now we got the reverse problem. We're selling oil, and if it's priced in dollars, uh, that's people have to come up with dollars, which is what's putting pressure on these foreign countries. But ultimately, it's anathema to any of our businesses that are trying to export. I mean, it's just brutal, and that's why earnings, I think, are just going to be disastrous.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. All right, I want to get your take on stablecoins, the stablecoin proposed legislation. So let me just pull up. Got some notes here to kind of run through, but basically, we started to hear about the background is U.S. lawmakers are reportedly drafting a House stablecoin bill that would place a 2-year ban on endogenously collateralized stablecoins, aka algorithmic stablecoins. It also mandates a study on Terra-like tokens from the Treasury in consultation with the Fed, the OCC, and the FDIC, and the SEC. I'm a little curious about why the SEC, but that's a whole other issue. I don't
Yeah.
understand why this would be under their purview. It also there was important guidance for how fiat-backed stablecoins should be regulated. Basically, it would allow both banks and non-banks to issue stablecoins. However, bank issuers need approval from federal regulators like the OCC, and non-bank issuers, it directs the Federal Reserve to establish the process for making application decisions. So this would be the first bill that kind of indirectly or directly targets actually the $153 billion stablecoin industry as it exists today. Curious to get your take.
Look, regulation is what incumbents use to slow down disruptive innovation. That's all this is. And again, that was one of the things Jamie was talking about is, properly regulated cryptocurrencies, stablecoins could be good. What that means is us, we get first dibs, and the incumbents don't like the fact that money fiat is leaving the banking system, converting to stablecoins or other cryptocurrencies, and living in this other ecosystem. And so, uh, when it was a couple $1 billion, no big deal. Tens of billions, yeah, no big deal. Hundreds of billions, now it's a problem, because our banking system, even though it is better, it's still not awesome in terms of health. So it's better. It's better enough that you can raise rates, which they are, off zero. But I think this is no more than an attempt, misguided, ill-guided, whatever you want to call it, attempt to delay the inevitable, which is the transition of the financial system from ancient technology, 60-year-old technology, to the new technology. And the banks could participate if they so choose, but they won't, right? Well, history says the incumbents choose not to change because they're afraid of giving up their gravy train that they've worked hard to create.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I completely. That's the lens that I kind of look at it through as well, because you know for me, it's hard to not look at this as such an own goal from the US, because
Yeah.
the US,
Own goal.
you know,
Perfect. Perfect.
at a at a time when, just ironically, dollar weakness, even though this is a non-consensus opinion and I understand that, but my view on the dollar is, right now it is the reserve currency and it appears very strong. Historically, reserve currencies tend not to last. There's about an 80 to 100-year window. We're bumping up the historical against the historical norm of how long reserve currencies last.
Yep.
As we abuse power internationally and use sanctions as a tool, we are aggressively eroding the network effect, right, of our currency at the same time where our GDP relative to world GDP is going down. To me, these all say dollar weakness in the long term, if not the next 2 years. But at the same time that's happening, the US basically has this jewel just dropped right into their lap, where if you consider, like I do, crypto as being the next iteration of financial infrastructure that's going to power the world, it naturally wants to use the dollar. It is like, it's this unbelievable gift. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is not shoot it in the face. That's the only thing that they
Correct.
have to do. And they might not do that. They might not do it. And it is just, yeah, it's an enormous, it would just be a damn shame as
You
a,
know,
as an American. I don't know.
to to play on the analogy in a bad way, right?
Mm,
You put a gun in Dick Cheney's hand, he's going to shoot you in the face, right? He doesn't really want to shoot you in the face. He's just going to do it, and
mm,
it's just his nature, right? It's
mm,
it's like I say about the fangs, right? Inappropriately named because fangs bite, right? Snakes will bite you. A dog with
mm,
fangs will bite you. I mean that is their nature, and it may not happen for a long time, but man, when it does, pain. And I think even the dollar milkshake, right? Even Brent would say that it was the one last cathartic spike in the dollar before the
yeah.
system collapsed, right? That
He's
that
a
was the whole
long-term dollar bear.
premise
Yeah.
that it was. Yeah, I hear the arguments, and you got Raoul's, Hurricane Cloud from an Endgame that he published. They got a lot of reads and all this stuff, but we're not going to have an end game right away
Mm,
because there's too many vested interests that don't want that to happen. So what happens is exactly what we're seeing is this kind of last cathartic squeeze of trying to make us the hegemonic reserve. And what happens? Okay, we squeeze so tight that poof, Russia pops out of this hand and China pops out of this hand, and what do? They get together, and now they're denominating transactions not in dollars, in renminbi and rubles. And
mm,
we did sanctions against Russia to crush their economy and crush the ruble. The ruble went up, and their economy is actually killing it because they're selling lots of oil and gas at significantly higher prices than So I find the weaponization of anything, maybe just axiomatically, right? The weaponization of things is bad, right? You
mm.
weaponize a flu virus and it's bad. You weaponize a currency and it's bad. You weaponize weapons, bad. Um,
Largely bad.
yeah, weaponize climate, right? Which is what they're doing now. Like
Yeah.
this woman, right, was trying to weaponize this opinion, and that's all it is, and it's opinion that somehow having a goal of zero carbon emissions is good. There's lots of debate on that, but just that opinion now is being weaponized to change behaviors. But here's the, there's a great line. I think Musk, again, I would piss off all the Tesla groupies. Musk was saying that, well, of course, internal combustion engines should be banned because every car should be electric. Like, if it's a really good idea, do you need to really legislate the computation away? In anything, right? If your
Mm,
idea is so good, then it should naturally displace the bad idea, right? You shouldn't have to
mm,
legislate. It's like if the XL pipeline was a bad idea, then you probably wouldn't have to legislate it away and prevent it
mm.
from happening.
But But I think there are examples where the free market doesn't necessarily solve societal problems. Like some of this gets into like long and short term decision making, and actually Vitalik wrote a really great post. He wrote it about DAO governance, but there are kind of like type 1 and type 2 organizations, whereas type 1 organizations are sovereign type organizations, type 2 are more corporate organizations. Corporate organizations, they're geared towards efficiently solving things, whereas type 1 organizations, there are other considerations, like the appearance of neutrality, like credible neutrality, stuff like that. But I want to before because I want to get your opinion on one thing before we go, which is, and I want to give a shout out to Ben Hunt, who recently came on the podcast.
Mhm.
Epsilon theory. Every time I read, I don't read it probably as regularly as I should, but every time I read it, I'm like, God damn, Ben, you just really nailed it. And the pop culture references, he does pop culture like no one else. He wrote a piece called "The Widening Gyre" recently. This is a reference to a poem, and that also encompasses the phrase that the center cannot hold, but it's like inspired by World War One or World War Two, I forget. But basically, he had this. The observation was the polemicism, the intense degree of America being divided. So there are these two stats that I want to show you. Supporters of both Trump and Biden were polled, and it's like 80% of Biden supporters and 77% of Trump supporters say that the other side, the other political party, does not share core American values with them. 77 and 80% on both sides. And this chart, this visual chart actually this said it all. This was like a light bulb moment that went on in my head. So
Mhm.
if you're following along just via audio, we're looking at three different periods: 1994, 2004, and 2017. We're looking at this two, basically, there's like a mound of blue, which is median Democrat political values and sentiment around them. And then the red is Republicans. You can see them moving apart. And then the purple is basically think about it like a Venn diagram, right? So there's like a blue
Mhm.
part of the Venn diagram, a red part of the Venn diagram, and then a purple part in the middle. What Ben points out in his writing is that the purple part in the middle was much larger in 1994, much smaller in 2017. You would probably intuit that, right? You'd think, yeah, it feels like the country's moving further apart.
Mhm.
But the observation that he made, and this is why it was a light bulb moment for me, is you can no longer get elected. Imagine you are a politician. You are trying to
Mhm.
figure out a target market to market your message to. In 1994, the target market that made sense was the purple part of the graph because that was larger than either the purely blue part or the purely red part. Now, if you go to 2017, the largest markets are either purely blue or purely red. But the purple part in the middle is smaller, which means there's a reason why, by the way, Blockworks this is a little inside baseball for Blockworks. We have a Blockworks macro channel and a crypto channels. And the reason why is initially we were like, well, I bet there's a bunch of people that actually like macro content and crypto content. I like macro content and I like crypto content. I thought it should go together. But it turns out
Mhm.
the audience for macro alone is probably an order of magnitude larger than macro plus crypto because
Mhm.
many people who are macro connoisseurs get actively turned off by the crypto content and vice versa. So when you try
Yeah.
to bring two big audiences together, it's actually smaller. So if you take that same analogy and apply it to politics, this is why you don't hear anyone talking to the middle anymore because there's no market for that. The market for purely liberal values or purely conservative values is larger now than the market for people who want to
I'm gonna
hear
make
both
one
sides of it.
one one correction and modification. Um, the reason you hear what you describe more is that there's no movement to purple, right? There's a reason that Prince,
Mm.
great musician, always wore purple, right? Because the king of, the color of kings and the color of neutrality. Um, I'm just kidding around, but the reality is you always got elected on the sides. You never got
Mm.
elected in the middle. No
Mm.
centrist ever gets elected, not ever, right? From Herbert Hoover, right, who started the white fright movement back in the 30s, to Bill Clinton in 1992, did not get elected, right, in the middle. Ronald Reagan in the 80s did not get elected in the middle. Okay, Reagan went way out right, Clinton went way out left, and what they do? They came in the middle. And in the middle, so the election short, ruling long, 8-year presidencies. So you didn't hear about the fringes because they governed from the middle. Now the problem, because of social media, is the purple's been dissipated. And so now you gotta run on the fringes, but then you gotta stay on the fringes. And now you gotta stay way out on the fringes because those tails have gotten bigger. So getting elected has not changed for hundreds of years. You have to go to one of the extremes. You have to elicit either like racism and hatred or like peace, love, and war, which are antithetical. But that's how you get elected. But the great presidents, the ones we think of as great, all govern from the middle. But now you're not allowed to govern from the middle. And you can't talk about the middle. You can't talk, like, people aren't even allowed, like even within families, to have different views.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's happened to me recently too. Yeah, I agree. If you espouse, basically, if you say you're in the middle, what people hear is you are closer to then that must mean you agree with this thing that I hate about the other side.
That I hate.
Yeah, I hate.
And hate is bad.
I'm with you.
Hate is bad. It's bad in everything.
Yeah.
Right? Look, I'm a pretty serious football fan. I love my Fighting Irish. We sucked this year, but I don't hate the people at USC. Right? I do call it the University of Spoiled Children, but I don't hate them. Right? And when we play Duke, I don't hate the Dukies. I might dislike Ratface, but I respect him as maybe the greatest coach in history. But hatred is bad. But man, that's where we are. We are at this politicizing and weaponizing of negative feelings, and you're not allowed to have dialogue and debate in search of truth. You're not allowed to listen to understand. You're only to listen, to persuade, to get that person to agree with you. And it's all social media. It's all social media. And it's bad. It's very bad.
Yeah.
Bad.
I agree. All right,
anyway,
Mark, we've got to end it
here. So we gotta flip it to the positive, which is the positive is there are people who recognize it, and there are people working to build up the purple. So that's a positive. But more importantly, from a positive note, as bad as all of this stuff is, right? As bad as the economic numbers look and the earning stuff, the reality is life is pretty good. And the fact that we can have this conversation every week, and that we can explore big ideas, and that we can have loyal listeners who actually give up their time. I get all these texts all the time. I'm having coffee with you on Saturday morning. I'm like, that's very cool. So that's the good part of media, and a little bit of social and Twitter and all that, the engagement. So that engagement is positive, and the formation of communities is positive. So there's a lot of good that comes out of it, but we gotta resist the bad.
I agree with you. Yeah, thank you for ending on the positive. Appreciate it. Mark, as always, favorite hour of my week. I'll see you here next time.
All right. Have a good one, my friend. Talk to you.